The Baptist Church of the Holy Salvation had never seen such a crowd before. The small brick building in a poor neighborhood of North Philadelphia was decorated with white ribbons and artificial flowers. The young people simply couldn't afford anything more. Creaky wooden pews were filled with relatives and friends, most of them dressed in their Sunday best, many of them wearing such clothes for the first time in years. Sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows illuminated the dark faces of the congregation, adding to the solemnity of the moment. Today, Shania Brettwaite was to become Mrs. Omalade. At 30, she had finally found a man who promised her stability, not a dream, but a roof over her head and dinner every night. Derek Omalade stood at the altar, adjusting his rented suit. His broad shoulders and large hands betrayed a man accustomed to physical labor, despite the fact that for the past 3 years, he had been the owner of a small grocery store on the corner of 23rd and Dakota. At 35, Derek had already achieved what many in his neighborhood only dreamed of. He owned his own business. Shania walked down the aisle to the sounds of an old synthesizer playing a wedding march played by Derek's cousin. Her white dress, bought at a consignment shop, but carefully tailored, accentuated her slender figure. Her hair was styled in an elaborate hairdo, her own work, as Shania was one of the best hairdressers at the Queen of Beauty salon on Lehigh Avenue. Among the guests sitting in the third row was Keon Ezimba. His dark eyes were fixed on the bride, and his hands nervously clutched the ceremony program. At 25, he was 10 years younger than the groom, fit, with a neat short beard and hands that always smelled of motor oil. Working as a mechanic at a nearby garage didn't make him rich, but it allowed him to make ends meet. And it gave him the opportunity to spoil Shania sometimes when they met in secret over the past 8 months. "We are gathered here today before the Lord," Reverend Johnson began, "to join these two people in holy matrimony." Keon felt bile rising in his throat. Just last night, he had begged Shania not to do this. Just yesterday, she had cried in his arms, saying she loved him, not Derek. But this morning, she had put on that white dress anyway. And if there is anyone who knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace, the priest said the traditional phrase. Silence. A heavy silence, broken only by the rustling of program booklets and the hum of a malfunctioning air conditioner. Derek took Shania's hands in his and began to recite the vows. "I, Derek Omalade, take you, Shania Brettwaite, to be my lawful wife, to love and cherish from this day forward." Something inside Keon broke. 8 months of secret meetings, 8 months of promises. "I'll break up with him when the time comes. We'll be together, just give me a chance. She doesn't love you." Keon's cry shattered the solemn atmosphere of the church. All heads turned toward him. Shania froze with a look of horror on her face. Derek frowned, not understanding what was happening. Keon rushed into the aisle, his hand reaching for the inside pocket of his jacket. The glint of a blade froze for a moment in the colored beam of light passing through the stained glass window. "Keon, no!" Shania cried, but it was too late. 3 quick steps and Keon was at the altar. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, he had already plunged the knife into Derek's chest. 1 stab, then another, then a third. Quick, precise movements, as if Keon had been training for this moment his entire life. Derek's white shirt was instantly stained scarlet. His eyes widened in shock and pain, and he tried to say something, but only a croak escaped his lips. The groom's large body swayed and collapsed to the floor right in front of the altar. "Shania, come with me." Keon reached out his bloodied hand to his bride. "Now we can be together." But Shania recoiled from him with an expression of pure horror on her face. Her scream merged with the cries of the guests, who finally realized what was happening. The church was plunged into chaos. Women screamed, children cried, men jumped up from their seats. Tyrone Diop, Derek's best friend, was the first to rush toward Keon. "You're crazy," he growled, trying to grab the killer. Keon, still clutching the bloody knife, pushed Tyrone in the chest, throwing him back. 2 other men tried to block his way, but Keon swung the knife, forcing them back. "Shania!" he shouted again. "This is all for us!" But the bride fell to her knees next to Derek's body, her white dress soaked with her fiancé's blood. Realizing that Shania would not go with him, Keon rushed toward the exit. People stepped aside, no one wanting to get in the way of a man with a knife. He had almost reached the church doors when sirens sounded outside. The first patrol officer, Officer Jenkins, happened to be in the area by chance. He was driving past the church and stopped when he heard the screams. When the doors flew open and a young man ran out with a bloody knife, the reaction was instantaneous. The gun was in the officer's hands before he could fully comprehend the situation. "Police, drop the weapon!" Jenkins shouted, aiming at Keon. Keon froze, staring at the gun pointed at him. The realization of what he had done flashed across his eyes. The knife fell from his suddenly weakened fingers. "On your knees, hands behind your head," the officer commanded, and Keon slowly lowered himself onto the concrete steps of the church. 15 minutes later, the crime scene was cordoned off by police. An ambulance arrived, but there was nothing that could be done for Derek. The stab wounds were fatal. Detective Aishua Finn arrived at Holy Salvation Church as Keon was being placed in the backseat of a patrol car. Tall, with short dreadlocks tied back in a ponytail, she moved with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. At 38, Aishua had seen her share of violent crimes in North Philadelphia, but a murder during a wedding ceremony was something new even for her. "What do we have here?" she asked Officer Jenkins, who was the first to arrive on the scene. "Murder, detective. A guy stabbed his fiancée right at the altar in front of everyone. Looks like a crime of passion. He was yelling something about the bride not loving him." Aishua nodded and entered the church. Inside, medics were already covering Derek's body, and police officers were separating witnesses for questioning. Shania sat in the front row, surrounded by crying relatives. Her gaze was empty, and she clutched a blood-stained handkerchief in her hands. The detective approached the body and lifted the edge of the sheet. 3 deep stab wounds to the chest. The killer knew what he was doing, or he was just lucky to hit the heart. The victim's face was frozen in a look of surprise, as if Derek couldn't believe what was happening until the very last moment. "Detective Finn," one of the officers called out to her. "We found a knife on the steps. The suspect dropped it when he was arrested." Aishua examined the murder weapon, a standard folding knife with a black plastic handle. You can buy one of those at any hardware store for $20. "Witnesses say the killer was sitting among the guests?" she asked. "Yes, in the 3rd row. It seems no one perceived him as a threat until the moment of the attack." Aishua approached the bride. Shania looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears and shock. "Miss Brett-Way, I'm Detective Aishua Finn. I'm very sorry about what happened to you. I understand that this is a difficult time for you, but I need to ask you a few questions." Shania nodded, her lips trembling. "Do you know the attacker? His name is Keon Azimba, correct?" For a moment, fear flashed in Shania's eyes, which seemed strange to Aishua. "Yes," whispered the bride. "He works as a mechanic at Wilson's garage. He sometimes fixed my car." "Is that all? Just a business relationship?" Shania lowered her gaze, her fingers nervously fingering the blood-stained handkerchief. We were acquaintances. Just acquaintances." Aishua noticed one of Shania's relatives, an elderly woman with a stern face, glance sharply at the bride. "He shouted that you didn't love your fiancé. What was that about?" "I don't know." Shania's voice trembled. "He must be crazy. Derek was a good man. We were going to get married." Detective Finn made a note in her notebook. Something about Shania's reaction seemed wrong to her. Of course, the shock of what she had been through could explain a lot, but Aisha's intuition told her that something was not right here. "We'll continue this conversation later," she said. "Right now, you need to rest." The detective walked over to a group of police officers photographing the crime scene. "Collect all the evidence carefully," she ordered. "And I need the names and contact information of everyone here." Leaving the church, Aisha approached the patrol car where Keon Azimba sat in the back seat, handcuffed. His eyes were red as if from crying, but his face remained hard and determined. "Detective Finn," Aisha introduced herself, opening the car door. "Do you want to say anything about what happened?" Keon looked up at her. "She loves me, not him," he said hoarsely. "She's loved me all this time, And that's why you killed a man? She was only going to marry him for his money, his shop, his stability. Kian smiled bitterly. But she loves me. We've been together for 8 months. For 8 months she promised she would leave him. Ishua looked closely at the young man. He didn't seem to be lying or delirious. His eyes were clear, despite his obvious emotional turmoil. So you had a relationship with the bride? Ask her, Kian said, turning away to indicate that the conversation was over. Ishua closed the door and walked to her car. She took out her phone and called the police station. I need all the information on Kian Azimbu, Shania Braithwaite, and Derek Omalade. Check their social media, bank accounts, phone calls, everything you can find. Getting behind the wheel, Detective Finn glanced once more at the Church of the Holy Savior. What had initially seemed like a simple crime of jealousy now looked much more complicated. If Kian was telling the truth, and he really had been having an affair with Shania, then this story took on a whole new meaning. Aishua started the car. She had a tangled web of lies, jealousy, and hidden motives to unravel, and she felt that this was only the tip of the iceberg. The interrogation room at the Philadelphia 22nd Precinct was like hundreds of others. Gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, uncomfortable chairs, and a large mirror behind which, as everyone knew, the observers were watching. Detective Aisha Finn sat across from Kian Azimba, studying his face. 24 hours had passed since the tragedy at Holy Salvation Church, but the young man looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under his eyes, sunken cheeks, cracked lips. Tell me about your relationship with Shania Braithwaite, Aisha began, turning on the tape recorder. Kian looked up at her wearily. We dated for 8 months, he said quietly. We met when she brought her car to Wilson's garage, an old Ford with a faulty starter. I fixed it for free. And that's how it all started? Yes, she invited me out for coffee to thank me. Then we met again and again. Kian smiled faintly at the memory. She said it was over with Derek, that she was just waiting for the right moment to break up with him. But she didn't, Aishwa pointed out. On the contrary, she was going to marry him. Kian's face contorted with pain. She promised. Every time we were together, she said we'd be open about our relationship soon, that she just needed time. He slammed his cuffed hands on the table. And then I found out about the wedding. She didn't even tell me herself. I heard it from friends, can you believe it? And you decided to kill her fiancé? Kian lowered his head. I didn't plan it. I wanted to talk to her, to make her see reason. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The night before the wedding, we met. She was crying, saying she loved me, but that Derek could give her stability, his shop, his house. I begged her not to marry him. She promised to think about it. And in the morning, she put on her wedding dress. Aishua finished. Yes? Kian raised his bloodshot eyes to the detective. When I saw her walking down the aisle, something inside me broke. I don't remember pulling out the knife. I don't remember walking up to Derek. I just couldn't let it happen. Do you admit that you killed Derek Omolad? Yes, Kian said firmly. I killed him. But Shania loves me, not him. She always loved me. Aishua closed her notebook. You are charged with first-degree murder, Mr. Azimba. You have the right to an attorney. I don't need a lawyer, Kian said wearily. I did what I did. Leaving the interrogation room, Aishua met with the assistant district attorney. We have a confession, she said, and dozens of witnesses. It's a slam dunk. What about a motive? Asked the assistant district attorney. Is the love triangle story confirmed? I'm about to find out. Shania Braithwaite is waiting for me in the next room. Aisha moved to another interrogation room where Shania was sitting. The bride looked no better than the killer. Her eyes were tear-stained, her hair was disheveled, and her hands were shaking. Her bright manicure, done especially for the wedding, was already starting to chip. Miss Braithwaite, Aishua began, sitting down opposite her, I need to ask you some direct questions. Kian Azimba claims that you had a romantic relationship. Is that true? Shania froze, her eyes widening in fear. She faltered, then lowered her gaze. Yes, we dated for a while. While you were engaged to Derek Omalade? Yes, Shania whispered. But I broke up with Kian. A month ago, I told him it was over. that I was marrying Derek. Interesting. Aishwa took a printout from the folder. We have records of calls from your phone. You spoke to Keon 17 times in the last month. And last night, the night before the wedding, you met him at the Bluebird Motel on 55th Street. Is that part of the breakup, too? Shania's face contorted in horror. How do you know that? Surveillance cameras, Miss Brett-Way. Modern technology. Aishwa leaned forward. What happened last night? Shania covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. I didn't know he would do that. I swear, I had no idea he was capable of such a thing. Tell me about your relationship with both men. Shania wiped her tears with trembling hands. I met Derek 3 years ago. He was a good man, reliable. His shop brought in a steady income. He asked me to marry him last summer, and I said yes. She paused. And then I met Keon. He was different, young, passionate. I fell in love like a girl. But you didn't break off your engagement to Derek. I tried, Shania said bitterly. Several times. But then I thought about the future, about how Keon and I would live. His job at the garage barely allows him to make ends meet, and Derek had a house, a business, a future. So you decided to marry Derek while continuing to see Keon? No, Shania exclaimed. I mean, I tried to break up with Keon many times, but he always called, begging to see me. And I was weak. What happened last night? Shania swallowed. Keon called and said he had to see me one last time. I agreed to meet him. He begged me not to marry Derek. He said he loved me, that he'd find a better job, that we'd be happy together. I said I'd think about it. But this morning, I put on the dress anyway. I wanted the stability Derek could give me. Did you love Derek? Shania hesitated before answering. I respected him. I appreciated his kindness. We could have been happy together. But you loved Keon. It wasn't a question. Yes, Shania whispered. God help me, I loved him. And I was still going to marry someone else. Aishwa looked into the eyes of the woman sitting in front of her. Shania was a victim. Her fiancé had been killed at the altar. But there was something else to this story, and Detective Finn was determined to get to the bottom of it. Did Derek know about your relationship with Keon? No, Shania replied too quickly. I mean, I don't think so. He never mentioned it. I see. Aishwa made a note in her notebook. You're free to go, Miss Brett-Way, but don't leave town. I may have more questions for you. After Shania left, Detective Finn called a small meeting of the investigation team. So what do we have? She asked her colleagues. A love triangle, a crime of passion. It seems simple. A jealous lover killed his rival. But I feel like something's not right here. The phone records confirm their relationship, said young Detective Jackson. They spoke on the phone almost every day, and they met at that motel at least twice a week for the last 3 months. What about Derek Omalad? Asked Aisha. What do we know about him? He owned a small grocery store on the corner of 23rd and Dakota, Officer Rodriguez replied, looking through the records. No problems with the law, paid his taxes. The only thing is, he's been having some financial difficulties lately. The store was barely staying afloat. Interesting, Aishwa muttered. Shania said she chose him because he was stable, but if the store was on the verge of bankruptcy... She turned to Jackson. I need to talk to Derek's friends, specifically his best friend, Tyrone Diop. He was at the wedding. An hour later, Tyrone Diop was sitting in Aishwa's office. A tall, 32-year-old man with a short beard and a heavy gaze. He was nervously twirling a coffee cup in his hands. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Diop, Aishwa began. I know you were a close friend of Derek Omalade. We were friends since we were 10, Tyrone nodded. We grew up together, got out of trouble together. He looked up at the detective. Sorry for the language. It's okay. Aishwa sat down across from him. Tell me about Derek and Shania. How did they meet? What were their relationship like? Tyrone set his cup on the table. They met at a barbecue at a mutual friend's house about 3 years ago. Derek fell in love right away. He said she was special. A year later, he proposed to her. Tyrone paused. But lately, something changed. What exactly? Derek, he started to suspect that Shania was cheating on him. Tyrone rubbed his forehead. About 6 months ago, he noticed that she had become distant. She often canceled dates, saying she was stuck at work. Derek didn't want to believe the worst, but did he know about Keon? I'm not sure. He never mentioned any names. He just said he had a feeling something was wrong, that Shania was pulling away from him. And yet he decided to marry her? Tyrone smiled bitterly. Derek was stubborn. He decided that marriage would fix everything. That if they got married, Shania would be the same again. He shook his head. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him that if there were problems, marriage would only make them worse. What do you know about Derek's financial situation? We've heard that his shop was struggling. Tyrone looked at the detective in surprise. Who told you that? Derek's store was thriving, especially in the last 6 months when he started working with local farmers and bringing in fresh produce. He was even planning to open a second store next year. Aisha frowned. This contradicted the information they had received earlier. Are you sure about that? Absolutely. Tyrone leaned forward. Listen, detective. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that Derek had finally made it. His store was the only place to buy fresh fruit and vegetables at reasonable prices. People respected him. So he was financially successful? Yes, Tyrone said firmly. He even bought a new house 3 months ago. 2 stories, with a yard. He wanted Shania and him to have a good start. Aisha made a note in her notebook. The picture was starting to come together, and it wasn't at all what Shania had imagined. Did Derek have any conflicts with Keon Azimba? Were they acquainted? Tyrone paused to consider. I don't think they knew each other well. Derek mentioned a young mechanic who had repaired Shania's car several times. But as far as I know, there were no conflicts between them. What can you tell me about the wedding day? Did you notice anything unusual before the attack? I saw Shania looking nervous. I thought it was just bridal nerves. Tyrone shook his head. And then this guy jumped up and... He fell silent, unable to continue. Thank you for your help, Mr. Diop, Aishua said softly. If you remember anything else, please contact me. After Tyrone left, Detective Finn sat for a long time looking at her notes. The story Shania had told her was significantly different from what she had learned from Derek's friend. If the store was thriving and Derek had bought a new house, the argument about stability seemed even more dubious. Aisha decided to check one more lead. She called the tax office and requested information about the financial status of Derek Omalad's grocery store. Confirmation came an hour later. The business was indeed successful, with growing profits over the last 2 quarters. Why did Shania lie about Derek's financial situation? Aishua muttered as she looked through the reports. What else is she hiding? The detective decided to talk to the bride and groom's colleagues again. She went to the beauty salon Queen of Beauty, where Shania worked. The salon's owner, Letitia King, a full-figured woman with bright purple hair, greeted Aishua warily. I already told the police everything, she said. Shania is a good stylist. Her clients love her. I had no idea about her personal life. What about her relationship with Derek and Keon? Aisha asked. Did you ever see them together? Letitia pursed her lips. Look, I don't want to say anything bad about Shania. She's just been through a terrible tragedy. I understand, but we're talking about murder. The salon owner sighed. Derek picked her up from work a couple of times a week. He was always polite and brought flowers. And Keon... She faltered. He came by too, usually on days when Derek was out of town. Did Shania tell you about her relationship with them? Not directly, but once I overheard her talking to Keon on the phone. It was a month ago, shortly before the wedding. She said something like, after the wedding, everything will change. We'll be together. Aishua frowned. Are you sure that's what she said? Absolutely. I thought it was strange considering she was going to marry Derek, but I decided I must have misheard her. Detective Finn thanked Letitia for the information and headed to Wilson's garage where Keon worked. The elderly owner of the workshop, Ray Wilson, was wiping his hands with a rag when Aisha approached him. Keon was a good mechanic, he said after the detective introduced herself. Quiet guy, always showed up on time. I still can't believe he'd do something like this. Did you know about his relationship with Shania Braithwaite? Ray nodded. He didn't hide the fact that he was in love with her. He always asked to leave early when they were supposed to meet. He often said that they would be together officially soon. Did he know she was engaged to someone else? Of course, but he was sure she would break it off. He said Shania was just waiting for the right moment. Ray shook his head. When he found out about the wedding, he was beside himself. He smashed a client's windshield. I had to deduct it from his pay. When did that happen? About 2 weeks ago. Shania came here and they had a big fight. Keon yelled that she promised to be with him, and she said she needed to think about her future. Aisha made a few more notes in her notebook. Thanks for the information, Mr. Wilson. Back at the station, Detective Finn called another meeting of the investigation team. We have an interesting situation, she said to her colleagues. On the one hand, we have a killer who has confessed and does not deny his guilt. On the other hand, there are a number of inconsistencies in the bride's testimony. Do you think she's involved? Asked Detective Jackson. I think she knows more than she's saying. Aisha laid out the photos and notes on the table. Shania claims she broke up with Keon a month ago, but we know they were seeing each other right up until the day before the wedding. She says she chose Derek because of his financial stability, but his business was thriving. He bought a new house. Why would she lie about his financial situation? Maybe she's just confused, Officer Rodriguez suggested. After all, her fiancé was killed right at the altar. That's a huge shock. Possibly, Aishua nodded. But there's something else. The owner of the salon where Shania works heard her tell Keon on the phone, after the wedding, everything will change. We'll be together. The detectives exchanged glances. What does that mean? Jackson asked. Was she planning to divorce him right after the wedding? Or something worse, Aishua said grimly. I need to talk to Shania again, and this time, I want to know the whole truth. The sun was barely peeking through the blinds in Detective Aishua Finn's office. A week had passed since the tragedy at Holy Salvation Church, but the investigation was just getting started. On Aishua's desk lay a folder with new evidence, printouts of messages between Shania Braithwaite and Keon Azimba obtained from the cell phone operator. The detective was reading them for the third time, highlighting particularly important passages with a marker. I can't do this anymore, Kay. I need to tell Dee the truth. Shania, 2 months before the wedding. Just a little longer, baby. Everything will be different after the wedding. I promise. Shania, 3 weeks before the wedding. Are you sure about this plan? What if he finds out? Keon, 2 weeks before the wedding. He won't suspect a thing. Trust me. We'll be together soon. Shania, 2 weeks before the wedding. Aishua rubbed her temples. These weren't just messages between two lovers. They were messages between people who had a plan that was supposed to be carried out after Shania and Derek's wedding. Detective Finn was almost certain that Shania hadn't planned the murder. But what exactly was she planning? There was a knock at the door. Detective Finn, we have the results of the financial audit, said young Officer Parker, entering the office. You were right. Aishua took the report handed to her. A week before the wedding, Derek Omelade took out a life insurance policy for $500,000. The sole beneficiary was his future wife, Shania Braithwaite. Interesting, Aishua muttered. How convenient for her. There's something else, Parker added. According to his bank statements, Derek withdrew $20,000 in cash the day before the wedding. We couldn't find out where the money went. $20,000 in cash? Aishua frowned. Why? Was he planning a surprise for Shania? We checked. There were no large purchases made in his name that day. No jewelry, no cars, nothing. Aisha tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. Set up a meeting with Shania Braithwaite and get a search warrant for her home. I want to know if she had that money. An hour later, Detective Finn sat across from Shania in the same interrogation room. The bride who had lost her fiancé at the altar no longer looked as devastated as she had a week ago. Her eyes were clear, her hair was done, and her nails were freshly painted. Miss Braithwaite, Aishua began, I have a few more questions. I've already told you everything, Shania said nervously. I didn't know that Keon was planning to kill Derek. But you knew something else, Aishua said, placing printouts of messages on the table. After the wedding, everything will be different. Soon we'll be together. What plan did you discuss with Keon, Miss Braithwaite? Shania turned pale, her eyes widening in horror. That's personal, she whispered. It has nothing to do with the murder. Let me decide what has to do with murder and what doesn't. Aishua leaned forward. Derek Omalad took out a $500,000 life insurance policy a week before the wedding. You're the sole beneficiary. He also withdrew $20,000 in cash the day before the ceremony. That money is still missing. I don't know anything about any insurance, Shania exclaimed. And I certainly don't know anything about any money. Really? Aishua pulled out another document. Then how do you explain that the insurance company forms were filled out in your handwriting? Derek didn't even know about the insurance, did he? It was your idea. Shania covered her face with her hands. It's not what you think, she whispered. I didn't want him to die. Then what did you want? Shania looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I planned to divorce him right after the wedding. Take the insurance money and start a new life with Keon. Aisha leaned back in her chair, trying to hide her surprise. You wanted to insure his life? Marry him and then divorce him right away? Do you realize how that sounds? The insurance would still have been valid, Shania defended herself. Derek would have been alive, just not with me. I knew that if I just broke off the engagement, I would never get out of this neighborhood. I have no education, no money. Working at the salon barely pays the rent. Did Keon know about this plan? Yes, Shania admitted quietly. He was against it at first. He said it wasn't fair to Derek, but then he agreed. We dreamed of opening our own garage, of becoming independent. And when did you plan to tell Derek about the divorce? A month after the wedding, Shania lowered her eyes. Long enough for the insurance to kick in, but not so long that it would look suspicious. Aishua shook her head, stunned by the cynicism of the plan. What about the $20,000 Derek withdrew from the account? I don't know anything about that money, Shania said firmly. I swear. Aishua studied the face of the woman sitting across from her. Shania might be a cold-blooded manipulator, but it seemed like she was telling the truth about this particular issue. What happened the night before the wedding when you met with Keon? Shania sighed. He was upset. He said he couldn't bear the thought of me belonging to someone else, even for a month. I calmed him down, told him it was only temporary, that we'd be together soon. She paused. Keon has always been emotional, impulsive, but I never thought he was capable of murder. Did you tell him not to come to the wedding? No, I wanted him to be there. Shania lowered her eyes. It sounds awful, but I wanted him to see that I was doing this for us, that I was sacrificing myself for our future. Aishua closed the folder with the documents. Miss Bretway, I think you should talk to a lawyer. Your actions could be considered aiding and abetting insurance fraud. But I didn't plan to kill him, Shania exclaimed in horror. That's for the court to decide, Aishua said coldly. Right now, I want to arrange a meeting between you and Keon Azimba. An hour later, Shania and Keon found themselves face to face in a confrontation room. There was glass between them. Security measures required that a prisoner accused of murder not have direct contact with visitors. Aishua stood in the corner, watching their meeting. Keon looked exhausted. His prison clothes hung loosely on his emaciated body, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. But when he saw Shania, his face lit up. Shani, he whispered, pressing his palm against the glass. I missed you so much. Shania did not respond to his gesture. She sat motionless, her eyes filled with tears. Why did you do it, Keon? She asked quietly. Why did you kill him? For us, Keon replied simply. I couldn't let you marry him. I couldn't wait another month. When I saw you in that wedding dress, walking toward him, I just lost it. You ruined everything, Shania said bitterly. Everything we planned. Now we have nothing. We have love. Love? Shania laughed bitterly. You're in prison, Keon. You're charged with first-degree murder. You'll never get out of here. But you'll wait for me? Keon asked hopefully. You love me, Shani. I know you do. Shania turned away, unable to look him in the eye. I don't know what I feel right now, she whispered. You killed a man, right in front of me. How can I love a murderer? Keon slammed his fist against the glass. You used me! His voice broke into a scream. This whole plan with the divorce and the insurance, it was your idea. You've been manipulating me this whole time. Aisha tensed, ready to intervene, but Shania didn't look afraid. She looked Keon straight in the eyes. I never asked you to kill him. Never. But you were willing to deceive him, to marry him without love, for money. I did it for both of us, Shania said quietly. You were just as greedy for that money as I was. Remember how we dreamed of having our own garage? A house in the country? Keon lowered his head, his shoulders slumping. I just wanted to be with you, he said. The money was secondary. Detective Finn says Derek withdrew $20,000 before the wedding, Shania said suddenly. Do you know anything about that? Keon looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes. 20,000? No, I had no idea. Are you sure? Shania insisted. Maybe he gave you money. Maybe he knew about us and was trying to buy you off. No, Keon exclaimed indignantly. I would never take money from him. I'm not for sale. Aisha watched the exchange closely. Both looked genuinely surprised about the money. Where had it gone? I think we'll leave it there, she said, stepping closer. Miss Brettwaite, the officer will show you out. After Shania left, Detective Finn sat down opposite Keon. You really didn't know about the money? No, Keon said wearily. This is the first I've heard of it. What about Shania's plan to divorce after the wedding and collect the insurance money? Keon lowered his eyes. It was her idea. At first I was against it. It seemed wrong. But then I thought no one would get hurt. Derek would get his month with the woman he loved. And then life would go on. He smiled bitterly. Stupid, isn't it? In the end, I killed him anyway. Why did you do it? I don't know, Keon replied honestly. The moment I saw her in her wedding dress, something inside me broke. I suddenly thought, what if she's cheating on me? What if she never intended to divorce him? What if she had been playing me all along? He clenched his fists. I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to stop the wedding. But when I got to the altar, the knife was already in my hand. It all happened so fast. Aisha nodded. Keon looked sincere. He had committed a terrible crime, but not out of selfish motives. Out of passion, jealousy, fear of loss. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Azimba, she said, standing up. Your testimony will be taken into account. Back at the station, Aisha gathered the entire investigation team. We have a complete picture of what happened, she told her colleagues. Keon Azimba admits his guilt in the murder of Derek Omalade. He acted out of jealousy, without premeditation. Shania Brettwaite did not plan the murder, but she did plan the insurance fraud. The case is practically closed. What about the missing $20,000? Asked Detective Jackson. We're still looking for it, replied Aisha. But it's no longer directly related to the murder. Most likely, Derek just hid it for a rainy day or was planning some kind of surprise for Shania. 3 months later, the trial of Keon Azimba was coming to an end. The courtroom was packed. The case of a groom murdered at the altar had captured the attention of the entire city. Shania sat in the front row, pale and haggard. Her lawyer sat next to her. The fraud charges had not yet been filed, but the investigation was ongoing. Keon stood before the judge, awaiting his sentence. He no longer looked so exhausted. After months in prison, he had grown accustomed to his new reality. His eyes were clear as he listened to his sentence. Keon Azimba, the jury has found you guilty of first-degree murder. Considering all the circumstances of the case, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A whisper rippled through the courtroom. Keon nodded, accepting the sentence. His gaze found Shania among the spectators. Their eyes met one last time, and in that glance was a whole world of unfulfilled hopes and shattered dreams. Shania was the first to look away. She stood up and quickly left the courtroom without looking back. Her life was just as ruined as Keon's. The two people she loved, each in their own way, were lost to her forever. One lay in a grave, the other would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And all because of her indecision, her inability to make an honest choice. Aisha Finn watched the scene from the back rows of the courtroom. The case was closed, the killer punished, but a strange feeling of dissatisfaction lingered with the detective. Something still remained unsolved. As she left the courthouse, Aisha saw Tyrone Diop, Derek's best friend, standing at the foot of the stairs. Justice prevailed? He asked bitterly as the detective approached. The law prevailed, Aishwa clarified. I'm not sure about justice. You never found the money? Tyrone asked. The 20,000 Derek withdrew before the wedding? No, Aishwa admitted. It remains a mystery. Tyrone nodded as if making a decision. Maybe I can help with that, he said quietly. Derek gave me that money the day before the wedding. He said that if anything happened to him, I should use it to find the truth. Aishwa turned sharply toward him. What? Why didn't you say anything all this time? Because the truth has already been found, hasn't it? Tyrone looked straight into the detective's eyes. The killer has been punished. What more do you want? What are you talking about? What truth was Derek looking for? Tyrone sighed. He suspected that Shania was cheating on him. He hired a private investigator to follow her in the weeks leading up to the wedding. The money was to pay for his services, and to pass the information on to the police if anything happened to Derek. And something did happen, Aisha said quietly. Why didn't you come to us sooner? Because the detective's report only confirmed the affair, Tyrone replied. Nothing about murder plans. Keon acted alone, impulsively, just as you said. What was the point of destroying Shania's reputation even more? She had already lost everything. Aishwa stared thoughtfully at Shania's receding figure in the distance. A miserable woman whose indecision and greed had cost 2 lives, one literally, the other figuratively. Sometimes the price of truth is too high, Aishwa muttered, but it always finds a way to come out. Shania got into a taxi and drove away, taking with her the burden of guilt that she would have to carry for the rest of her life. Her dreams of a better life, of wealth, of love, all turned to dust. Now she had to learn to live again, knowing that her choices had led to a tragedy that could never be undone. It was the highest price she had ever paid for the truth about herself.